Brian and Neera, thank you, and good morning, everyone. As you all know, this happens to be Election Day, although there aren't too many big contests today, unless, of course, you count Dancing with the Stars. Just in case you're wondering, I'm betting on Rob Kardashian. You can write it down right now. I did want to thank the Center for American Progress and the American Action Foundation for hosting us. Who said there is no bipartisanship in Washington. Hopefully it will last longer than this speech. And if you believe that, I have a bridge I want to sell you. It's always nice to come to Washington, though, for a few hours anyways. Seriously, I've come here as a concerned citizen like all of you, as an entrepreneur who's dedicated 20 years to building a company, and as the mayor of 8.4 million people, many of whom are deeply worried about their futures. Nearly 40% of my constituents are immigrants. They came to America and to New York City for the opportunity to work and to build better lives for themselves and their families. And that's the promise of America, a nation of dreamers and strivers. We keep our eyes on the stars and our nose to the grindstone. We understand that success requires hard work. There is no free lunch. And that is true in New York City, and it's true in towns across America, except one, and that's Washington. For too long, Washington has operated on the something for nothing principle. Both parties have promised their constituents the world and given them debt and a sluggish economy and anemic job growth. They've adopted ambitious programs without any serious way of paying for them. They've promised to produce and protect jobs, and in all fairness, for the most part, the elected officials have kept their jobs. But right now, there are 14 million Americans every day who can't find work, and more who have stopped looking. Now, both parties preach fiscal responsibility, and yet the national debt stands at $10.3 trillion. That is about $34,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country, and it is growing by $4 billion every single day. If our current tax and spending policies hold, in 10 years, the national debt will be $21.5 trillion, or about $72,000 per person. Thanks to the prudence of the two parties, the federal government is currently running annual budget deficits of $1.3 trillion, which means it's borrowing $1 out of every $3 it spends. To put that in perspective, if you made $40,000 a year, would you spend $60,000? No, not for long you wouldn't, because no bank would continue to lend to you. But Washington doesn't have that problem. It effectively prints money while the rest of us have to earn it. And so even during the good times when responsible management of the budget would have meant saving money, Washington was gorging itself on debt. In 2000, the federal government took in $2 trillion in revenues and spent $1.9 trillion. In 2010, the federal government took in $2.3 trillion in revenue and spent $3.6 trillion. That means over the past 10 years, our revenues increased by 15%, while our expenses increased by 80%. Spending money we don't have seems to be about the only thing the two parties can agree on, but it is threatening the very future of our country. Why? Well, that's what I'd like to discuss today. Why the era of something for nothing has to end, and end now, or what it will take to do it. For the past few years, government has attempted to stimulate the economy largely by deficit spending and tax cuts. And I think it's fair to say that the results have been, at best, mixed. Even though we are in better shape than Europe, far too many Americans are still out of work. Far too many families are having trouble keeping up with their bills. Far too many small businesses are still struggling to keep their doors open, and they are responsible for about half of the jobs in America. By now, I think it should be clear that more government spending and tax cuts cannot stimulate the job growth we need to regain economic stability. We've already crossed that bridge and borrowed too much. Likewise, consumer spending cannot stimulate the growth we need to regain economic stability because consumer debt remains too high. Both government and consumers have balance sheets that are heavily in the red. Neither has the money to lead an economic recovery. But luckily, one group does, and that group is business. Unlike in the run-up to the 2008 crash, where businesses took too much risk, today they're not willing to take risk at all, and we need them to do so. And the result is that a lot of capital is sitting on the sidelines. Why this is happening is not something that government leaders seem to fully grasp, in my view. And as someone who has been on both sides of business and government, I've seen how the two sides often talk past each other. Last week, at Senator Michael Bennet's request, I convened a dinner with a bipartisan group of senators and New York business leaders. We had a frank discussion about the economy and how Washington is handling it. Some of the business leaders expressed the concern that they are not being heard in Washington, and I think they're half right. They are being heard, but they are not being understood, and hopefully this morning I can do a little translating for them. Generally speaking, major American companies are not short on cash, but one of the big reasons they are not investing is that they are short on confidence in the federal government's ability to manage macroeconomic policy. Companies do not make major investments when the future of tax and regulatory policies are so up in the air. Every CEO and business leader that I speak to says virtually the same thing. They are not going to make major investment decisions until they know how Washington intends to grapple with our huge deficits. And right now, they have no idea how or if that's going to be accomplished.